Hey guys, and welcome back to Not Your Mama's Murder, the podcast where each week we take a look into the true crime stories that rocked our headlines. My name is Elisa Birdhill, and this week we are going to be talking about a shooting, a stabbing, and a missing person. So, I kind of, on a whim, over the weekend, decided to just drop the introduction episode of this podcast. If you listen to that, you know that I talked about all of these ideas I had, and one of those being sitting down each week and just talking about news in the headlines for that specific week. That way we stay up to date on some of the stories that will probably be covered more in depth on the podcast in the future. This week, a lot happened. There's one specific case that I just wanted to go ahead and sit down and talk about. And so rather than waiting for everything to be perfect how I wanted and stressing about what you guys were going to think and getting everything exactly the way I wanted it to be, I said, you know what? I'm just going to drop it. That way we can get into these weekly headlines. And then, of course, the more long form podcasts that I have planned will come a little later. But for now, I'm very excited to do the weekly headlines episode. If you did not catch it at the beginning, it will be called Not Your Mama's Murder in the headlines. So I think it's pretty straightforward. It tells you exactly what we're going to be covering, and of course still includes the same podcast name. It'll be in the same feed. It'll just be considered, I guess, bonus content, little short mini episodes. So I'm very excited to do this. We are going to kind of bounce around the United States, a couple other countries, and things like that. Now, to be clear, it would not be possible for me to cover every single thing that was in headlines in a week. We would be here until next week, and it would just be a never-ending cycle. So I did pull some of the bigger ones that there will be a continuance of in the future, or ones that were putting a close on something that had happened in the past, and then just a couple other small ones that I thought it would be nice to mention because there's not really anything happening with them at the moment. I'll actually just go ahead and start. I'm speaking specifically of the Nancy Guthrie case. Officials are still just trying to fact check the messages they have gotten, making sure they are credible and from the kidnappers, and they just say that they still hope that DNA is what solves the case. Nancy has been missing for 49 days as of the recording of this, probably longer once you're hearing it. But other than that, there is really nothing going on as far as that case goes, which is very sad. I don't know what's worse, actually. Wondering every single day where your family member or your loved one is, or just finding them and it being a bad result, but ultimately being able to know where their body is and have that kind of closure. I think either way is very hard. So we are going to hop over to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where a 14-year-old boy whose name is Havoc Leone. Now, I'm assuming this name is Havoc. I don't know what else it could be pronounced as. It is spelled Havoc. To me, that is Havoc. I'm not sure at all what else it could be. Which kind of gives me pause. I'm not sure how you get to naming a child Havoc, but that is his name. I think I mentioned already, but he is 14 and he is facing first-degree murder charges, and he is being charged as an adult and for shooting and killing his mother. His bond was set at $500,000. His lawyer has made an effort to get that lowered, as well as getting the charge lowered to second-degree murder, but those were both denied by the judge. Police were originally called to the home of Teresa McIntosh and Thomas Leone, which is the boy's parents, to investigate an apparent suicide. Thomas stated to the police that he was in the basement playing video games with headphones on when he heard a pop sound. He went upstairs to see what the sound was. There, he found Havoc, who said he wasn't sure what happened and the gun had just gone off. Thomas then called 911. He administered first aid. Once the ambulance arrived, Teresa was transported to a local hospital where she eventually and unfortunately did pass away from a gunshot wound to the head. Officers could tell right away that this was not an attempted suicide due to a few things. The placement of the wound, it was above her right ear. The fact that the gun never made contact with the skin at the site of the wound, and the fact that there was no exit wound for the bullet like you would find in a close range shooting like a suicide. This, of course, turned the investigation from suicide to homicide. Being the only two people in the home, Thomas and Havoc were questioned. Havoc at first said that his fingers slipped, which triggered the gun, but after only about an hour and a half of talking to the police, he did admit to shooting his mother. Two things I would like to add here. First and foremost, teach your kids to never talk to authorities without you, or even better yet, a lawyer present with them. Even if they are guilty, it is their right to have someone who has a better understanding of the law with them during questioning. Secondly, I just want to go into the details of him accidentally pulling the trigger. It takes a minimum of 2 pounds of pressure to pull a trigger, and that could even go up to 15 pounds of pressure depending on the type and the age of gun being shot. So accidentally pulling a trigger is extremely rare because of that. Anyway, Havoc told the police that he and his mother had gotten into an argument earlier because he had stolen a tablet from a client of Teresa's house cleaning business. I'm so sorry if you can hear my children upstairs. When she found this out, she was understandably very upset and an argument broke out. Havoc said that he had went to grab a piece of paper that had the tablet password on it, and when he did, he also grabbed the gun. It did come out later that he had also stolen that gun from his mother's car. To get her attention, he threw the paper at his mother, and when she leaned down to pick it up, that is when he shot her. Now, his defense lawyer is arguing that his confession is nothing but hearsay because of the way it was presented in court. As of now, a hearing has not been scheduled, but I do imagine this one to be back in the headlines in the future, so of course we will stay up to date and bring it up again once things are decided on. From Wyoming, we are going to go north a little to a headline that is from Anchorage, Alaska, sort of. Anchorage officials had a manhunt for 61-year-old Matthew Becker. He allegedly gunned down his ex-father-in-law and shot his ex-wife, attempting to kill her. The ex-wife reported that she did not even know Matthew had returned to Alaska, as he had moved to Chandler, Arizona following their divorce, and he actually owned a comedy club there. So she was very shocked when he appeared on the outside of, when he appeared beside of her car outside of her hair salon, where he then proceeded to shoot her. She survived and called 911 to inform them that she was afraid for her father's life, but it was too late. Matthew had already made his way to his ex-father-in-law's home and shot several rounds through a window, striking and killing him. Through the investigation, police did learn from Matthew's brother that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Fearing that he had nothing to lose, the manhunt was started, and it would unfortunately end in officials finding Matthew's deceased body in a wooded area nearby the day after the shootings. They're still determining cause and manner of death, but it is a suspected suicide. Moving right along from Alaska, we are heading to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this one is brief, but I did want to mention it. A 16-year-old girl and her daughter have gone missing from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Their names are Mia and Desaria Gibbs. They were last seen on March 14th, 2026, and as of today, again this is Saturday, their whereabouts are still unknown. If you have any information that could lead to finding Mia or her daughter, you can submit a tip through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website or call the Fort Wayne Police Department at 260-427-1222. Now, a much larger case that was in our headlines this week is that one of Kouri Richins. Now, if you plan to do your own research and look up Kouri, I'm going to spell her name for you because it is not spelled like my husband Corey or even with an E. It is Kouri Richins, Kouri Richins. She was back in headlines this week because it only took a jury 3 hours to deliberate and determine that she was guilty of fatally poisoning her husband with fentanyl back in March of 2022. Just a brief rundown of that case and a little bit about Kouri. She is a real estate agent and a mother of 3 in Utah. Following her husband's death, she went on to write a children's book about dealing with grief, which is probably what she is most known for. Her husband Eric was killed with 5 times the lethal limit of fentanyl in his system. Kouri's motive for killing her husband was the same as it always is when a spouse kills. She just happened to be a woman in a male-dominated field. Financial debt, a new love interest, and insurance money. The investigation brought to light that she had searched fentanyl doses to kill and that she had bought the fentanyl prior to the poisoning. It also came out that at the time of his death was not the first time Kouri had attempted to poison Eric before, the first time being on Valentine's Day. It also uncovered fraud and forgery. Her official charges were fraud and forgery, aggravated murder, and attempted murder for that Valentine's Day poisoning. She faces 25 to life, and her sentencing has been scheduled for May. So again, this case will definitely be coming back in the future, and we will update you on what she is sentenced to for the murder of her husband. All right, scooting on over to Queens, New York. Several members of the MS-13 gang have been sentenced this week. Oscar Flores was sentenced to 45 years for the 2018 murder of a 17-year-old. Ramiro Gutierrez and Tito Martinez were sentenced to 55 and 48 years respectively for a daylight execution of a rival gang member. This sentencing follows a mass sentencing that happened back in 2025 that I did just want to mention because it was a pretty big deal. 18 gang members were charged with 10 murders, 7 attempted murders, racketeering, and sex trafficking, along with other small petty crimes. One gang member in specific, George Flores, did receive a life plus 65 years at that mass sentencing, which is a long time. And also, if anyone from MS-13 is listening, I'm just stating the facts. That's all. Moving to Canada, which did surprise me. This is, first of all, you don't really see a ton of crime out of Canada. It is more rare than in the United States, and typically not one of this magnitude either. However, a Nova Scotia girl and a Manitoba boy are both facing charges after planning attacks together online. Allegedly, these attacks were to take place at their individual schools. Both children, of course, have to remain anonymous due to being minors, to being children. But Canadian officials did say that they received information from Interpol that the two had been talking online about mass casualty events at both schools. Police reacted fast and tracked down both students, actually arresting the boy straight off of his school bus. The school bus was pulled over, he was pulled off and arrested. And the girl was not at home when they went to arrest her, but she was arrested just a short distance away. When arrested, both were unarmed, but a search at the home of the girl did turn up an assault rifle, a homemade pipe bomb, and handwritten plans and hate symbols. Because of this, along with it appearing in the online exchanges that she was the primary aggressor, she is facing worse charges than her male counterpart. The investigation is ongoing, and a hearing has actually been set for next week. So again, I do expect that we will have an update in that case coming up. All right, for the next one, we're going all the way to Italy. Now, sort of. This is one that I had planned to talk about. And as I researched, I realized there was very, very limited information about this case. I'm going to go ahead and still talk about it for a few reasons. The first being, we know that protecting women is not a priority in the United States. Essentially, police will tell you that even if you have a restraining order or an order of protection, the best they can do is to get justice for you once you are harmed or killed. Really, that's all it is. They basically do nothing when orders are violated, and it is just a paper trail to show the cycle of abuse. I'm unsure if it is the same in Italy. My only experience with their justice system is the Amanda Knox case, and she was not treated very well by them, so I have to assume it is the same. Which, by the way, yes, I will eventually be covering Amanda Knox's case. It is a large project to take on for another time, but we will get there. Anyway, the case that happened this week is that of a husband, Vincenzo Donganelli. He fatally stabbed his wife, Valentina, in the neck. Now, I could only find one article that even mentioned Valentina's name, which makes me incredibly sad for her. However, through some more in-depth research, I did learn that they had been married for less than a year and that there were documented other incidents of domestic violence within that year. This one I'm going to do more research into and keep up to date because I really couldn't find anything telling me what he was being charged with, if anything at all. Now, I should mention, he did have to be transported to the hospital, and he made a failed attempt at taking his own life after killing his wife. And I'm sorry, but this is going to sound brutal. I don't mean for it to, but how do you successfully kill someone else and then fail at killing yourself? It just doesn't make sense to me. And like I said, with only one article mentioning her name, not listing charges, it just seems very suspicious to me. So I am definitely going to keep my eyes on that one and look for updates as time goes on. Now we're to the big one, the one that I couldn't wait to talk about, that kind of pushed me to go ahead and release the podcast and just get everything going. This one is Joseph Duggar. Now, to be completely transparent with y'all, the Duggar family is my niche interest. I watched their show growing up. I've read all of the books, the ones they wrote when they still lived at home, the ones they've written since they have moved away from their family and started wearing pants and things like that. I am not a fan by any means, but I am very intrigued by them and their upbringing. And that's actually the case with any Fundy family, really. And that stands for fundamental, I'm sure you know. But the Duggars are just the most prominent and easy to keep up with because of the show and now that their presence on social media and things like that. If you have been my friend on Facebook for any amount of time, but especially since 2022, you know my personal opinion is that IBLP is not a religion, it's a cult, and cults breed abuse, which is exactly what we are going to talk about that made headlines this week. Most of you probably know but Josh Duggar actually made headlines before his brother Joe. Josh is the oldest Duggar child, and he has been in the news a lot for multiple different crimes and scandals, and he is currently serving 12 years in federal prison for the possession of CSAM. Now, CSAM, for those of you who don't know, stands for Child Sexual Abuse Material, which is what we used to call child porn. That term is outdated and no longer used because children cannot consent to making porn the way an adult actor can. You will not hear me ever refer to it as child porn. It is always CSAM. That is the correct term for it. And while we're talking about it, to be completely honest, adult film actors do not consent. The porn industry still, in general, doesn't take good care of its actors. But I digress. That is a topic for another time, as is Josh's crimes. Josh's case is another one that I will likely go into more in depth in the future. This week, news broke that Joe Duggar, which he is child number 7 for Jim, Bob, and Michelle, if you don't know, had inappropriately touched a 9-year-old girl on family vacation to Florida back in 2020. Reports say that the victim asked Joe to stop, and he apologized and stopped. This week, that victim came forward and told her father what Joe had done, at which point the father confronted Joe. Joe confessed, and then the father contacted the police. Joe was arrested and charged with lewd acts with a child under 12. Now, he was arrested in Arkansas. The crime happened in Florida, so he waived his right to extradition and is waiting to be transferred to the Florida jail. Which, if we know anything about Florida, is that they do not play when it comes to their sentencing. They take it very, very seriously. Skipping ahead a little bit in the timeline, a couple of days after Joe was arrested, it came out that his wife Kendra was now being charged with 4 counts of child endangerment and 4 counts of false imprisonment. Taneytown Police, which Taneytown is the town in Arkansas where most of the Duggars live, the big houses, all of those. Taneytown Police did say that those charges were unrelated to those in Florida, but that an investigation into both Joe and Kendra's home and the Big Duggar house was being conducted. Kendra turned herself into police and was released on $1,470 bond. I'm sure, actually, I can say for 100% certainty, we will be talking about this case a lot in the coming weeks as new information comes out. I also would like to say, I was not surprised when things came out about Josh Duggar. He always just kind of had that vibe. He was kind of smug and arrogant, especially on the show. It made me physically ill to watch Anna, his wife, kind of be sold off to him, so to say. However, when the news broke about Joe, I was surprised. Not that another Duggar boy had done something bad, but that Joe was the one to do it. And I think that just goes to show that these people who do these things are so good at hiding it, and that's what makes it so dangerous, is that you would actually never suspect them. I will just mention also briefly before we move on from this one, a lot of people I have seen online are wondering why Kendra would have been arrested, but Anna wasn't. And there's not going to be one answer to that. We don't know where those charges that Kendra is being charged with comes from. If false imprisonment could just mean that she fled from CPS. It can mean there were locks outside of kids' doors instead of inside. It can mean a lot of things, and I don't want to speculate on what those are until we know for a fact. However, the big thing that I think is provable that is different between Kendra and Anna is that even if Anna did know what Josh was doing, it was not hands-on. He technically, for what he is serving time for, did not touch anyone, so Anna could not have been a part of it. Whereas, whatever is going on with Joe, there were hands-on touches between him and a minor child. So I think that is the big difference to keep in mind. Of course, anyone who is being charged with anything is presumed innocent until found guilty. So we have to go into it with that outlook. But just for anyone who is wondering, well, Josh's crimes were so bad, why was Anna not arrested but Kendra is? I do think that is probably the most likely reason why. Now, sorry, I bumped the mic. Now, moving out of Arkansas, we are up to Jason Don McGregor, who was found guilty of manslaughter and DUI resulting from a fatal crash that happened in 2022. When that crash happened, Jason had failed to stop at a red light at a high rate of speed. This action caused the victim, Marlon Weaver, who was driving an 18-wheeler hauling fuel, to swerve to avoid getting hit by Jason, and thus causing his trailer of fuel to overturn. And unfortunately, Weaver did die on impact of that overturn. Jason was again found guilty of manslaughter and driving under the influence, and he was he is scheduled to be sentenced on April 29th at 10:30 in the morning. And I just want to take this time to remind everyone, please, 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 please do not drink and drive. Do not drive on any kind of medication. It says do not operate heavy machinery for a reason, and I know it's funny to joke that we kind of picture like backhoes and things like that, but it means a vehicle. Even if it is prescribed to you, it can be so dangerous to drive, especially after drinking. And I'm just going to be honest with you, my personal outlook for anyone who drinks and drives is that it is selfish. You are putting yourself, your family, and every single person you pass on your way to wherever you're going in danger. Not just cars, because we have seen cars also go through homes. Innocent people sleeping or eating dinner or whatever, and cars come through their homes because the driver of the car was impaired. So please drink responsibly. Always have a DD. Call an Uber. Do not drink and drive, because your life and other people's lives are more important than that. And I will get off of that soapbox. Moving on, we're going to go to Mississippi. And this one is actually, I think it's referred to as the state line triple murder in Mississippi. We're talking about it because it made headlines because a trial date was finally set for Drexler Johnson, who is the accused of committing the triple murder. The victims were Rhonda Denson, her boyfriend Lester Campbell, and Jason Thorin. Rhonda was a store clerk, Lester was her boyfriend, and Jason was just a customer at the store. Drexler waited outside the store for it to open and then came in masked and armed to rob them, and then proceeded to shoot all three of the victims. He was originally only charged with accessory after the fact, but quickly his charges were upgraded to 3 counts of capital murder, as well as possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. Now, this gets a little confusing, but I'm going to go into it anyways. Capital murder is the highest murder charge. It is even above first-degree murder. And the reason is because it requires certain circumstances to be a charge. Now, my guess that is in this case, the special circumstance would be that it was actually felony murder that he committed, which could be a charge on its own, but they have chosen to file it under capital murder. Felony murder means that a murder occurred during the commission of another felony crime, which in this case would be robbery. Capital murder is often punishable by the death penalty, and the death penalty actually has not been taken off of the table for this case. So it is possible that we could see Drexler face the death penalty for this triple homicide. His trial is set to begin May 26th of 2026, which is my baby girl's 10th birthday. It's very bittersweet to see her grow up and into the double digits. She is very excited to be a big girl, but mom is not so excited for that. We are gonna hop over to California now. I actually had not even heard of this until I sat down to Google headlines from this week, and it popped right up, and I was so shocked because it's something you would think you would hear about, but I guess there is so much going on in the news right now that it just wasn't one of those things that was really loud. So earlier this week, a woman named Aviana Ortiz was arrested for firing 4 shots from an AR-15 into Rihanna's Beverly Hills home. And yes, that Rihanna, singer Rihanna, her, A$AP Rocky, and their children were home at the time of the shooting, but thankfully no one was injured. Aviana is facing 10 felony counts and could face up to life in prison for those 4 shots. Couple more I have here. We are actually going to go over to Barcelona, where the body of a 20-year-old University of Alabama student was found in the water off of a Barcelona beach. His name was James Gracie, and he was in Barcelona visiting friends for his spring break. He was reported missing when he didn't return back to his Airbnb after going out to spend the night at the club. Autopsy results are pending and the investigation is ongoing, but the assumption is that it was just an awful, tragic accident, which I am currently working on a long form case for the other part of the podcast that is also a spring break death. And this week my children are on spring break. So just a family friendly reminder, along with the don't drink and drive, to always be safe on spring break, especially when going to touristy locations. Share your location with someone. Always make sure someone knows where you are. All important things to be safe. I do have just one honorable mention that is not something I would typically cover, but you can't talk about headlines this week without reading the name Taylor Frankie Paul. And because it does tie a little bit into true crime, I figured I would mention it. Taylor Frankie Paul was ordered to have no contact with her ex-boyfriend Dakota. Yes, I'm concerned about what that was. I hope you could hear it, because if not, I'm going to sound crazy, but it was very loud. This comes, of course, after she pled guilty to a prior 2023 domestic violence charge with Dakota. As a result of this latest no contact order, her co-stars on Secret Life of Mormon Wives has refused to work with her, and of course her already recorded season of The Bachelorette was pulled from ABC. I'm going to be honest, hopefully that is one that is no longer in the headlines and we don't have to cover any more reality. Stars are not something that I thought I would be covering a whole bunch of in true crime. Like I said, the Duggars, sure, I understand, but not a mom talk girl. Well, that will wrap up in the headlines this week. I am so excited for the first week of this podcast, and I look forward to being back to talk about the headline next week. Thank you. Bye.